It's time for Season 6 with the NIU Huskies, and after a devastating loss in the first round of the playoffs last season, Coach Brooks and the Huskies are looking for revenge. It will be interesting to see how the Huskies fare this season, as unlike last year, they have a full 8-game Big Ten schedule to compete with, but coming in as a 91 overall 4-star team, I think they'll do just fine. Nick Yeast is in his third and final season as the Huskies starting quarterback, coming in at an 87 overall, looking to build off last year's great season. The backfield is stacked for NIU with 84 overall junior Juan Branham and senior Zach Gertis, who might be a Heisman hopeful this year after taking home Running Back of the Year award last season. Freshman Thomas Hand showed so much promise last season as our leading receiver, and he looks to build upon that year now as the sophomore's wide receiver 1 for the Huskies, along with freshman 4-star recruit Bobby Clemens, who will be starting at wide receiver 2. Redshirt freshman Denzel DeLoach overtook Bryce Hainsey in spring practice to become our number 2 tight end behind senior Mitch Kuma, and Kevin Coffey is entering his final season with the Huskies defense, with Juan Rosario on the other side of the linebacking core, looking to also make an impact here in his sophomore season. The only true freshman starting for the defense was last year's 4-star recruit Derek Vaughns at strong safety, and he will have redshirt freshman Corbin Dog starting alongside him at free safety. After pulling in our smallest recruiting class of the series last episode, we were going all in on recruiting this year, especially on 5-star gem right end Cole Polk, 4-star outside backer Anthony Herbig, guard Darren Holyfield, center Anthony McKenzie, receiver Emmett Pounds, corners Matt Stark and Keontae Cutting, athlete Rayshawn Sorseth, receiver Tremaine Kugbilla, and D lineman Craig Lincoln were all gems that we had found scouting recruits in the preseason. We then added 4-star halfback Sergio Maragos, 4-star defensive tackles Adonis Longo and Javier Yerby, and 4-star athlete Tim Turtle. Hopefully we can have a much better recruiting class this season. We had a pretty tough schedule though headed into Season 6, with last season's championship game rematch in Week 3 against Iowa. Let's see if we can start this year off on a good foot against FCS West at home. This game should ideally be the easiest on the schedule all season for the Huskies, but last year we did see the trend of them playing down to their competition and having really close games against teams they should have easily beat. Hopefully that's not the case here against FCS West, as we would waste no time getting on the board first today, as senior tight end Mitch Kuma would get the first points of the season for us, and then it would be DeMarco Vernon. 2 seniors back-to-back would put us up 14-0, and then Nick Yeast would take off on his feet, as it was now 21-0, and we were only halfway through the second quarter. On first and goal from the 7, Nick Yeast would find the true freshman Bobby Clemens for his first career touchdown, and there was still somehow over a minute left to go in this first half, and we weren't done yet as Zach Gertis would take this to the house, and this looked like it was going to be an absolute blowout now, but we were keeping Nick Yeast in the game to try to go for the record. He only needed 2 more touchdown passes to tie it, now make it 1, and on first and goal from the 6, he would drop back to throw, fire to the back of the end zone, and just like that, he would tie the single game record. Although he wouldn't get another touchdown pass the rest of the game, it was still by far the best game of his career, but unfortunately his name wouldn't be going in the record books. It was time for Big Ten conference play, and this was going to be the first full season of competition for the Huskies in this conference. Last season they only played 4 games due to a weird scheduling error, so this season we'll see how the Huskies stack up against a full schedule. They were off to an early 7-0 lead over UCLA, and the defense was going to get a big time stop. As we'd move to right before the 2-minute timeout, the Huskies up 14-7 over the Bruins, and Nick Yeast looking to get his team down the field for some points. Just past midfield is on first and 10, he'd go right side to Mitch Kuma, and he would make a diving catch, but after a sack bringing up 3rd and 16, Thomas Hand would be just short, so the offense would stay out on the field, and the Nick Yeast quarterback sneak would pick it up no problem, as this drive would stay alive and find the end zone, with senior tight end Mitch Kuma putting the Huskies up 21-7, but their first offensive drive of the second half would stall out on a 3rd down, but they still held a 21-7 lead. Faced with a 3rd and 9 right before the end of the third quarter, they were looking to extend that as Thomas Hand would get down inside the 10, setting up a 3rd and goal where the freshman Bobby Clemens would haul this one in, and it was a 28-7 game here. The Huskies looking for one more defensive stop. They couldn't get it on that 4th down, but they would have another chance here as Bernie Bragg would come away with the interception for the Huskies defense. But the offense wasn't finished yet as Nick Yeast would tack on another passing touchdown, and one more stop from the defense on 4th and inches would wrap this game up as the Huskies get the big time 35-7 win over the UCLA Bruins here on the road, with Nick Yeast throwing throwing another near perfect game for the Huskies, and these past 2 games to open up the season would rocket him up to the top of the Heisman list. This was a big game coming up for the Huskies, as they were taking on Iowa in what was a rematch of last year's Big Ten championship, where the Huskies would go on to win and make the playoffs. NIU wanted to prove that last year's win wasn't a fluke against the Hawkeyes, and they were off to an early start, as on 1st and goal, Nick Yeast would take this on his feet into the end zone. It was still only 7-0 at the start of the second quarter, as Nick Yeast would roll out to the left, dump this off to Denzel Deloach, who would take it into the end zone, as the Huskies were now looking to go up 21-3 before halftime, but Nick Yeast would throw his first interception of the game. Interceptions were something the senior quarterback struggled with his very first season as a starter, but he made great improvement last season as a junior with ball security, and it has been even better so far this season for him. His ability to make the right reads early on in this season has led to easy games for the Huskies like this, where they were up 28-3 with just over a minute to go, and one more touchdown here to the freshman Bobby Clemens would make it 35-3, as the Huskies would end up beating the Hawkeyes even more dominantly than they did in last year's championship game, and Nick Yeast continued to dominate Big Ten defenses through the air so far. Taking a break from conference play, NIU was on the road taking on Middle Tennessee State, and it wouldn't take long for the Huskies to find the end zone on their very first possession of the game. Middle Tennessee State was going after it and being aggressive early on in this one as well, as they would pick up that 4th down conversion, and on 3rd and 5 would take a shot to the end zone, but Bernie Bragg would be there for the INT, giving NIU a chance to go up 14-0 on this next drive, but a 3rd down pass that was almost picked off would force them to punt the ball away. The defense had been suffocating the Blue Raiders offense so far, as that would give Nick Yeast less than a minute to go to try to get his team down the field, and I don't know how that wasn't a late hit penalty, but just a couple of plays later to the end zone, Nick Yeast would find his sophomore receiver Thomas Hand to put his team up 14-0 as we head to the start of the 4th. It has been surprisingly a low-scoring day for the Huskies offense so far, as that touchdown would only put them up by 3 possessions here halfway through the 4th, but 2 defensive stops later and a forced fumble recovery by the Huskies defense would see them win this game with a 28-0 shutout on the road, with Nick Yeast throwing for under 200 yards, but by no means a bad day for him, as he was still your Heisman leader a third of the way through the regular season, having thrown for almost 1,000 yards, 18 touchdowns, and only 3 interceptions through 4 games so far. That win would also land us 3-star wide receiver Tremaine Kugbilla, but we would miss out on one of our 4-star gems, cornerback Matt Stark, as he would sign with Iowa. The Huskies had another rematch from last season, as this time they were at home taking on Missouri. They got the best of them last season and were looking to do that again, as they were off to a great start. Thomas Hand with a 64-yard touchdown reception to get the Huskies on the board first, as the Tigers now were in the red zone and they were driving down looking to match that touchdown. Faced with a 3rd and 16 after that sack though, quarterback Dontrell Camarda would take off running for the Tigers just short of the 1st down, so they would keep the offense out on the field and pick up the 1st, as that would end up being the smart move and paying off, as the Tigers would get on the board and now had an opportunity to go up 14-7 over the Huskies near the end of the 1st quarter. On 1st and goal, it would be a handoff to Rashard Cahill, who would find his way into the end zone, and this was not a great start to the game for the Huskies, as they were now playing from behind and they would turn the ball over here, as that would be a fumble and Missouri would recover, but thankfully our defense would give us an opportunity to get right back in this game. Even though that play didn't go the way we wanted, we would respond right back on the next play, with Mitch Kuma hauling in that touchdown pass, giving us just over a minute before halftime, and Thomas Hand would haul in another one for us. But why not make it 2 touchdowns before half, as with 10 seconds left, Yeast took another shot to Thomas Hand, and the sophomore pulling in 2 big touchdown passes before half, putting us up 28-14 over Missouri, and another touchdown would make it 35-14. A defensive stop here with just over 2 minutes to go would all but seal this game, as it would be Bernie Bragg coming away with another interception in his 2nd straight game for the Huskies defense. And with Nick Yeast's Heisman campaign still alive, you know we had to pad his stats at the end of the game, as the Huskies would get the 42-14 victory here at home, with not only a dominant performance from Nick Yeast, but a fantastic day from Thomas Hand with every single reception going for a touchdown. That win would land us some more recruits, including 3-star center Rayshawn Forsyth, 3-star defensive tackle Craig Lincoln, and our first 4-star of the season, Sergio Maragos. close. We would lose out on 2 recruits, including 4-star gem receiver Emmett Pounds, and unfortunately, the top recruit on our board, 5-star gem Cole Polk. We would lose another recruit to in-conference rival Iowa. It was back to Big Ten conference play for the Huskies as they were on the road in the Coliseum taking on the USC Trojans this week. And this would be one of the toughest environments the Huskies would play in all season, as early on, Nick Yeast would be making a poor read and throwing an interception. And so far throughout the first quarter, neither teams had much success on offense. The Huskies defense had forced a safety, but neither team had gotten on the board after that in this game so far. But we were looking to change that right before halftime as Nick Yeast was leading the offense down the field, where on 3rd and goal, it would be a play action to Jaredis. Nick Yeast would roll out to his right, and he would take this in for a touchdown. And headed into the 4th quarter, the Huskies would have a 9-3 lead over the Trojans and were looking to expand it. On 2nd and goal, the Huskies offense would go back to the same exact play they scored on last time, but this time, Yeast would dump it off to Jaredis, who would hold on to it in traffic, as the Huskies would go up 15-3 over the Trojans, but instead of a touchdown, would have to settle for a field goal on their next possession, allowing USC to get this game within 1 possession, but the Huskies would recover the onside kick and would manage to hold off USC here on the road as they would get the 18-10 victory over them. That win would land us 4-star center Anthony McKenzie, but we would lose out on yet another recruit to another Big Ten school this season. We had to start restocking our recruiting board and would target 4-star receiver Jimmy Moses, 4-star right guard Ty Harris, and 4-star athlete D Field. Nick Yeast's Heisman campaign was still in full effect through the first 6 games of the season, so hopefully he could continue this dominant level of play this week against UNLV, and it looked like he was going to do that early on. After that big completion to sophomore Thomas Hand, he would go right back to him on the other side of the field, setting us up with a 1st and 10 from the 10-yard line, where he would roll out and find Hand once again, this time in the end zone. And on our very next possession on the very same play, would go right back to the sophomore once again. The Huskies were now up 14-0 over the running Rebels with just under a minute and a half to go here in the first half. And Nick Yeast was looking to get our offense down the field before halftime, but would get a little too greedy on this throw and would throw an interception. But even with our defense giving us another chance to score here, our senior quarterback would throw another interception. George Howden picking it off for the running Rebels defense, and with no one in front of him, he would take this back for a last-second pick 6, putting the running Rebels right back in this game against the #1 Huskies. Coach Brooks' decision to go for it on 4th down there would pay off, as Yeast would find his senior tight end Mitch Kuma for a touchdown. But the running Rebels just would not go away easily, as they were still only down by a touchdown, and on 3rd and 3 from the 4-yard line, they would tie this game up. UNLV now had a chance to take their first lead of the game, but on 3rd and goal from the 7, they wouldn't be able to convert and would have to send their field goal unit out for a 24-yarder, which they would miss. The Huskies just got so incredibly lucky there with a missed chip shot field goal, and so now all the Huskies would need is a field goal to win this game here at home. Faced with a 3rd down, it would be a handoff to Zach Jaredis, who would keep this drive alive, and even though they were thinking field goal on this drive, a touchdown wouldn't hurt, as Thomas Hand showing off his shifty skills, putting the Huskies up 28-21, and all they would need is a 4th down stop here. This would be the last play of the game, as it is launched deep, and Quinn House is there to pick it off for the Huskies. And the redshirt freshman seals this game for NIU with his first career interception to give them the 28-21 victory, with our wide receiver 1 Thomas Hand having yet another fantastic game. Even though it was close, that win would land us 4-star linebacker Anthony Herbig, as well as another offensive lineman and 4-star Darren Holyfield. I can't believe I'm saying this, but we would lose out on another recruit to Michigan, and after our bye week would lose out on yet another recruit, this time to Kentucky. We had also fallen down to #2 in the rankings, but we're taking on #12 Washington next week, so hopefully a win today can get us back to #1. It was a rough start to the game for the Huskies, as they were down 7-0 and would go the entire first quarter without scoring any points, but that would change in the second, and we had a chance to go up by 10 against the other Huskies, but a missed field goal there from Trent Butt would not help us at all. I'll be honest, I don't like how the simulation simulation in this game played out at all for me. I played the entire season with play the moments, and this game really didn't give me many to play at all, and I think the game lasted only 7 minutes and didn't give me many scoring opportunities. So I'm really only able to show you guys what I was able to play, but as it started getting down to crunch time here, we were able to play more moments against the Huskies. A big 3rd and 17 here after that sack, and a stop would be great for us, as that is exactly what we would get and had a chance to run the clock out. With no timeouts left, a first down on this play would seal the game for us as we would pick it up, and Nick Yeast would kneel out the rest of the clock, and although we didn't get to play it much, we would get the victory here at home, 21-14 over the other Huskies in the Big Ten. However, with only 100 yards passing that day, Nick Yeast dropped all the way from number 1 to last in Heisman voting. But on the bright side, we were projected the number 1 seed in the college football playoffs and would land another 4-star commit in defensive tackle Javier Yerby. We were back at home again this week, taking on the 4-4 Wisconsin Badgers as we look to stay undefeated on the season. And Nick Yeast was hopefully going to have a great performance today as he was looking to climb his way back up the Heisman ladder after dropping down last week. So far, him and the offense were off to a great start as we'd find the end zone here with Bobby Clemens. But it wouldn't take Wisconsin's offense long to respond as they would soon find themselves down inside the red zone. And then on 2nd and goal from the 3, they would tie it up at 7 apiece. This was an action-packed first quarter, still over 2 minutes to go, and Nick Yeast and our offense was looking to strike again as he would get them down inside the 5, and on 3rd and goal from the 2, he would find Bobby Clemens again. But we hadn't been able to slow down Wisconsin's offense at all either today until now, as we would get the sack on 3rd and goal and force a field goal, giving us an opportunity to go up by 11 with 3 minutes to go in the half. That would be Bobby Clemens' 3rd touchdown reception of the day for him, but Wisconsin would answer right back, and we were giving them a chance to take the lead here before halftime. Thankfully, our defense would get a 3rd down stop when we needed it the most, and to end the second quarter, the Badgers would have to take a field goal as it was now only a 1-point lead for us. Thankfully, that Mitch Kuma touchdown would give us an 8-point lead over the Badgers, and even though we'd have to settle for a field goal here, we'd still go up by 11, and with just over 2.5 minutes to go, would tack on one more touchdown for extra measure, as we would walk away with a 38-27 win over Wisconsin, and Nick Yeast found himself climbing back up the Heisman list as he was in 2nd place after that week. It was time for our in-state rivalry as we were taking on the University of Illinois. Early on, we would be faced with a 4th and inches, but as usual, Coach Brooks would keep the offense on the field, they would convert, and that would result in a touchdown on the next play. And we were off to a hot start against Illinois as we had gone up 14-0, and we were looking to extend that. But on 3rd and goal from the 2, we wouldn't be able to find our way in, and would have to settle for only 3 points. It looked like this was going to be a blowout as we had a chance to go up by 24 over the Illini before halftime, and we would do just that as on 3rd and goal, Nick Yeast would find DeMarco Vernon for 6. But we still had an entire second half to play in which the Illini fought their way back in it. Faced with a 3rd and 1 now, down by 8, they needed a touchdown and a 2-point conversion as that interception would be missed. Bernie Bragg couldn't make this touchdown saving tackle, and unless Nick Yeast could get us down the field, it looked like we were going to overtime. That was a huge pass completion to Mitch Kuma here as we'd center the ball, and Trent Butt would be sent out for a game-winning field goal, but he would miss it. That meant we were going to overtime with the Illini here, and don't ask me why they're starting with the ball on their own 35-yard line because of some glitch, but it doesn't matter to them as they would take this for a house call. So that meant we needed to get a touchdown on this possession, but we would end up fumbling the football and Illinois would recover it, meaning they would complete the upset of us coming back from down 24-0, and we would drop all the way from number 1 to number 8 in the country after that loss. The Huskies were back at home in DeKalb, and they needed to bounce back after that tough overtime loss to Illinois, not only to climb back up in the standings, but because they had their 3 last recruits visiting today as well. It was not off to a great start for them though, as Indiana would get on the board first, and it had been a slow start for the Huskies offense, but Nick Yeast would get them down into the end zone, as DeMarco Vernon would tie it up at 7 apiece, and then the Huskies defense would get a big time stop, but now we're faced with a 3rd down of their own inside the 10-yard line, as the tight end Mitch Kuma would pick up the first down, setting up this 1st and goal play where he would find the end zone, giving the Huskies another chance here to go up by 14 before the end of the first half. With just over 30 seconds to go, Nick Yeast would throw a dart to his tight end Kuma, getting his team down to the 17-yard line, but on 2nd and 10, Nick Yeast would throw his first interception of the day. And that really seemed to shift the momentum as our offense couldn't get it going in the third. We would have to settle for a 53-yard field goal attempt, which Trent Butt would miss off the bottom upright, and the struggles for our senior kicker after last week's crucial miss seemed to have carried over into this week as well. Indiana would tie the game up at 14 apiece because of that, but thankfully Nick Yeast would take off on his legs into the end zone, and after getting a defensive stop, all we would need is one more first down to clinch the game, forcing Indiana to use their final timeout. And with that timeout being sent, Nick Yeast would come out in victory formation to take a knee, and albeit close, the Huskies were back in the win column with a 21-14 victory over Indiana here at home. But despite another great performance from Nick Yeast under center for us, the voters just could not overcome that loss to unranked Illinois as he had fallen out of the Heisman race. It was time for our regular season finale, and we were headed into this last game with a must-win situation if we wanted to make the conference championship. Thankfully, on paper, Rutgers was 7-4, and they weren't one of the better teams in the Big Ten Conference, but that's exactly what you could have said about our matchup against Illinois 2 weeks ago, and hopefully this isn't a sign of things to come. Our defense would get us the ball back, and Nick Yeast, looking to make up for that mistake, would get us down inside the 5-yard line, and then on 1st and goal, it would be sophomore Thomas Hand on the wide receiver sweep for the first touchdown of the day, putting us up 7-0 and a chance to go up 10-0, but Trent Butt would miss another kick. He needs to find his confidence back as we get ready for the postseason, which hopefully is going to start with the conference championship game, especially since he has won us so many games in the past with his kicking ability. Thankfully, it didn't look like we were going to have to rely on Trent Butt's leg today, as we were up 21-0 with just over 2 minutes to go here in the 4th quarter as Rutgers would finally score. They would somehow make it a 1-possession game, but needed to recover this onside kick with 8 seconds left to go. And not being able to do that, we would close out the regular season with a close 21-14 win over Rutgers on the road. That win would also land us 4-star tight end D Field, 4-star right guard Ty Harris, and 4-star wide receiver Jimmy Moses, giving us the 27th ranked recruiting class in the country at the end of the regular season. Not only did that win land us our last 3 recruits on our board, but landed us in the Big Ten Conference Championship as well, where we would be taking on number 1 Penn State. Early on, we would start with a 4th and 1 as Coach Brooks would leave the offense on the field, and it would pay off big time for us. But this was a 4th down we weren't going to go for, as we would settle for a field goal. And thankfully, it looked like Trent Butt was getting his confidence back as he had finally knocked home a field goal for us. Not much had happened in the first half, as under a minute to go, we were only up 3-0, but we're looking to change that here as we'd get down inside the 10, where on 1st and goal from the 7, Nick Yeast would step up in the pocket and take it into the end zone himself, giving us a 10-0 lead as we'd skip to the 4th quarter where Penn State would tack on a touchdown. But we were putting together a promising drive that hopefully would extend this lead. With a 3rd and goal from the 6, Nick Yeast would drop back, but the pressure would get to him, and once again, we'd be forced to settle for another field goal. After our defense would get a stop, we were nearing the 2-minute timeout, but Penn State still had all 3 timeouts left, so if we could pick up this first down here, all we would need is one more to force the Nittany Lions to use their final timeout. And after they did so, Nick Yeast would take a knee, and we would walk away with a 13-7 victory here in Indianapolis over the number 1 Penn State Nittany Lions, and had won the Big Ten championship for the 2nd year in a row. After the season wrapped up, Mitch Kuma would be named the best tight end in the nation, and although he didn't ultimately end up winning it, Nick Yeast would finish 3rd on the Heisman voting list. That win over the number 1 Nittany Lions would move us up from number 5 to number 2, where we would end up getting a 1st round bye in the 2029 college football playoffs, and we would be taking on Ohio State in the Goodyear Cotton Bowl quarterfinal. The Huskies desperately wanted to avoid a quarter round final exit like they did last season, and so far this game looked off to a much better start as they would find the end zone first with Mitch Kuma. But Ohio State's offense was marching down the field on their first possession, as on 3rd and 10 they would pick it up with a halfback screen, and they would go right back to the other side with a wide receiver screen, but our defense was all over it, forcing the Buckeyes to settle for a field goal on 4th and goal. But halfway through the 2nd quarter, they had a chance to take the lead in the red zone, so we needed this stop on 3rd and 12 as we would force an incomplete pass. And once again, Ohio State would have to settle for only 3 points, as we still held the lead and had a chance to extend it before before halftime, but on 3rd and 4 would go backwards. And it looked like this game was turning into a battle of who could kick the most field goals. Ohio State would respond with a touchdown, and now we were down 13-10, expecting to just run the clock out with this play, but we got a big chunk. And that play from Zach Jairus allowed us to get a little more aggressive here. So much so that we decided to go for it on 4th and inches. And that decision would pay off as DeMarco Vernon would take this wide receiver pitch into the end zone, giving us the lead headed into the second half, where we would go right back to the same play. This time it would be sophomore Thomas Hand taking it for us, putting us up by 11, 24-13 over the Buckeyes headed into the 4th. Once again though, faced with a 4th down, we would have to settle for a field goal, and the Buckeyes only had 6 seconds and counting. Down by 14, they would take a deep shot to the end zone, and this would be completed, but that play would take the entire time left on the clock as we would hold off and get a 27-20 victory over Ohio State with a near perfect performance from Nick Yeast through the air, giving us the victory here in the Cotton Bowl over Ohio State and sending us to the Rose Bowl, which would be a Big Ten championship rematch against the Nittany Lions. Penn State definitely was looking for revenge after we defeated them in the Big Ten championship, and they were getting off to an early start, picking off Nick Yeast. We would back them up to a 3rd and 13, however, and would almost come away with an interception of our own. And throughout the course of the first half, even though it was slow, would go up 7-0 over them. We were looking to keep that lead, however, with 20 seconds to go in the first half, up 7-0. Penn State would manage to find their way into the end zone, but thankfully we would get that lead right back at the start of the second half. After our defense got a stop, we had a chance to drive down the field to extend our lead. Not being able to pick up that first down though, we would have to settle for a field goal. Penn State would respond with one of their own, bringing us to the 2-minute timeout where we were up only by 1 possession over them. But a first down would seal this game for us as they only had 1 timeout remaining and would have to use it here as we would pick it up, allowing Nick Yeast to kneel the rest of the clock out, and that would make it 2-0 against the Penn State Nittany Lions on the season, as we would clinch the Rose Bowl semifinal victory, and that would send us to the national championship as we would be taking on #1 Clemson, led by the quarterback who won the Heisman over Nick Yeast, Vinny Hurley. It was time for the national championship game, and we had a chance to do something we hadn't done before, which was win the national championship with the Northern Illinois Huskies. The Huskies had been to the national championship one other time under Coach Brooks, but they lost that matchup to Michigan. So Coach Brooks did not want to be 0-2 in national championships in his career, and although his team seemed to be a little nervous, they were settling in as the Huskies offense would get a field goal for the first points of the day, and the defense would get a stop on Clemson's first offensive possession as we were now nearing the end of the first half. Heisman winning quarterback Vinny Hurley was driving his team down the field though, but he would be picked off by Bernie Bragg at the 23, taking this back around the 50-yard line, giving senior quarterback Nick Yeast just enough time to get his team down the field. And although they wouldn't find the end zone, points were still points. It was not a great performance in the first half for the Heisman winning quarterback, but Hurley was looking to change that here in the second half with a great play, keeping his eyes down the field, and that would put Clemson up 7-6 over the Huskies, who would have to start the fourth quarter with a punt. Vinny Hurley and the Tigers offense had a chance to take over this game now as they seemed to have gained the momentum over NIU, and on 3rd and goal from the 7, they would do just that as they would score another touchdown, but to everyone's surprise, they would miss the extra point and this game was still manageable for NIU. Down by 7, they would have to go for it here on 4th and inches with 1.5 minutes to go, and they would pick it up no problem, but after a holding call on 2nd and 10, it was 2nd and 20, and Nick Yeast would be intercepted by the Clemson defense. The Huskies needed to get a stop here on 3rd down or the game was over, and they would do that. All out of timeouts though, they had to move the ball 58 yards to get a touchdown just to send it to overtime, and facing a 4th and 7, this could be the ball game as Nick Yeast would find his receiver open. DeMarco Vernon keeping this game alive for the Huskies. 1st and 10, Nick Yeast would take a deep shot, and that would be intercepted yet again by Clemson, officially sealing the game as that second interception would end it, and once again the Huskies' national championship hopes would end in utter defeat as they would be forced to watch Clemson raising the national championship trophy tonight. After losing in the national championship for the 2nd time in this series, there was nothing left we could do except retool and get ready for the offseason. We unfortunately had one of our key offensive linemen, Larry Gunderson, who wanted to transfer, and we were not able to persuade him to stay with us. We did have 4 players projecting for the draft, including Kevin Coffey, Zach Jairus, and Bernie Bragg. All 4 of them would end up getting drafted drafted, including Mitch Kuma, who originally wasn't even projected to be drafted. Headed into the transfer window, we had the 36th ranked recruiting class in the country, and we were going after 3 recruits in right tackle Brian Muty, middle linebacker Pat Temple, and tight end Najee Fusha. Unfortunately, Brian Muty would end up signing with the Michigan Wolverines, but we would land both 4-star middle linebacker Pat Temple and 3-star tight end Najee Fusha, giving us the 31st ranked recruiting class at the end of the season. We had 2 recruits who were technically athletes that we needed to assign a position for, as 73 overall D Field would become a 73 overall right outside linebacker, and 62 overall Rayshawn Forsyth would become a 68 overall defensive tackle for us. We had some great progression in the roster this year, as we now had 3 players on our team over a 90 overall or higher, but perhaps who made the biggest jump this offseason was freshman Terrence Redmond, headed into his sophomore season and was now the projected starter. We'll see how he holds up, as we had a tough schedule, including a rematch against Clemson next season, and headed into the 2030 season, your Huskies were projected to win the national championship for the first time next season.